The child appeared on Elias Grunwald's sofa at 1:30 on a Wednesday morning, cross-legged, barefoot, and trembling beneath a hospital gown that had never been washed. A red plastic bracelet clung to her wrist. She was exactly as he had written her last week, down to the shaved patch of hair where a doomed surgery was supposed to occur in chapter 22. Her whisper shattered the soft hum of the refrigerator. "You stopped." Elias froze halfway between the kitchenette and the desk, clutching a mug that still steamed. "You can't be here." "That's what the others said too." The child tucked her chin, gaze hauntingly adult. "But we keep coming." When she vanished, only an eye blink of static in the corner of his vision, then nothing but indentations on the sofa cushions. Elias allowed the mug to slip from his fingers. Porcelain burst across the parquet floor, scalding coffee soaking the soles of his socks. He hardly felt the burn. This was the third visitation in as many nights. He had thought the first two were nightmares, the kind brought on by too much bourbon and too little sleep. A whittled coal miner with one arm and a ragged cough had materialized beside the radiator Sunday. A double amputee war nurse, smelling of rust and morphine, had perched on the windowsill Monday. All three belonged to the same manuscript, the Halo Concerto, a novel reviewers were already calling Elias Grunwald's bleakest symphony. None of them had reached the redemptive chapters still locked in the outline taped above his desk. Now his characters were staging an intervention. Insomnia drove Elias onto the streets of Manhattan by dawn. Broadway's neon signs had surrendered to milk-gray fog, and the scaffolding along West 96th dripped last night's rain in slow, percussive taps. He walked, shoulders hunched, until the rhythms of the city almost drowned the voices echoing in his mind. "Finish us. Turn the page. Let it end." He could not be sure whether the words were memory, imagination, or some psychic commentary piped from a world he himself had shaped and abandoned. 10 blocks south, he slipped into the Blue Lantern Cafe, ordered black coffee, and unfolded his laptop. The cursor blinked in chapter 22, precisely where the child's speech had collapsed into ellipses. Her name was Camellia, after the flower people used to signify longing. She was 11 years old, and she was supposed to die on the operating table so that her father, a banker whose greed triggered the catastrophe at the novel's center, might confront his failing. Elias' fingers trembled above the keys. Any other day he would have typed with surgical detachment. Characters suffered, storytellers sharpened the knives. It was the pact readers made with him when they opened his books. But now Camellia had borrowed his sofa. She had left a hollow so unmistakably human that Elias feared returning home to find her shadow charred onto the cushions like a Hiroshima silhouette. He closed the laptop, untouched coffee cooling beside it. Outside, the fog shredded under a shy sun. Elias decided, with the desperate logic of a man fending off madness, to seek advice from the one friend who still tolerated his vanishing acts. Penny Lorca, playwright, occasional drinking partner, and ferocious skeptic of anything that reeked of the supernatural. Penny's walk-up smelled of gingered tea and old playbills. She greeted him wearing flannel pajama pants printed with Shakespearean insults. "Jesus, Elias, you look like the dictionary definition of unwritten." "Unwritten? You know, halfway erased." She eyed the coffee stains on his jeans. "You bleeding caffeine?" "Not mine. The mugs." "Obviously sit, talk." He recounted the visitations. Coal miner, nurse, child. Penny listened, elbows on knees, no sarcasm clouding her expression. When he finished, she said, "So your characters have hopped out of your head, demanded narrative closure, and then poofed. That's definitely a new flavor of writer's block. I'm not hallucinating, Penny." "I didn't say you were, but you are a professional torturer." She flapped a hand at the stack of his novels on her shelf. "Every book you write is a corridor of heartbreak. What happens if the condemned start knocking on the executioner's door?" I tried to write." Elias's voice cracked. "I can't." "Won't, you mean?" "Same difference." "It isn't." Penny poured tea into 2 chipped mugs. "Look, maybe the only way forward is through. Finish the damn chapter. And let Camellia die." "Does she have to?" "It's thematically. Screw themes." You're not carving Greek tragedy into marble. You're dealing with whatever this is. If your conscience is waving red flags, rewrite. Elias paced between the sofa and bookshelf. I've spent months orchestrating this arc. If I change it, everything unravels. The coal miner never finds purpose. The nurse never forgives herself. They're on your couch, begging for mercy, Aline. Purpose and forgiveness sound like upgrades. He drained the tea in one gulp, blistering his tongue. Suppose I revise. Suppose I save them. Will they stop appearing? If they're manifestations of unfinished business, probably. Penny nudged the laptop he had lugged along. And if they're not, at least you'll have draft 2. Elias opened the lid. The cursor blinked again. Pulse of a tiny bomb. Camellia, he wrote. Not the surgery scene, but an escape. Camellia fled the hospital with help from the nurse Veronica Price, who fashioned prosthetic legs for herself out of scrap metal and hope. Together, they reached the coal miner, Saul Ruggieri, who had tunneled beneath the banking district to sabotage the vault that symbolized his old life's burial. The three formed a fragile alliance to expose the banker's crimes without destroying themselves in the crossfire. It was rough, lopsided, bleeding cliches, Elias's internal critic howled, but it was alive. He hammered keys for 14 hours, pausing only to sip water. Then he refilled glasses, tossed him granola bars, and threatened to taser him if he checked word counts. At 2:11 a.m., Elias typed. Camellia raised her handmade sign. She broke into Zerv's sunlight above the riotous crowd, and for the first time since her diagnosis, the wind felt gentle instead of cold. End part 3. He hit save. Then he asked Penny if she felt a chill. Chill? Like a vacuum popped, the lamp rushed. Penny closed her eyes, sensing. Can't say I do. But Elias did. A strange hush, the kind that follows a death rattle, settled over him. He was about to mention it when the apartment lights flickered. A shadow rose from the doorway. Veronica Price limped into the living room, copper prosthetics gleaming. She carried a bouquet of camellias. Elias's scream jammed against his Adam's apple. Veronica placed the flowers on the coffee table and bowed her head. Gratitude and sorrow mingled in the lines of her face. You're not finished, she said, voice like distant artillery. But the child can breathe. Penny uttered something profane. Veronica turned toward her, meeting the playwright's stare with unreadable steel. Then dissolved into motes of light that spiraled through the ceiling and were gone. Elias collapsed. Penny knelt beside him, whispering, Okay, so empirical data, definitely not a panic attack. Word spread, not publicly. Elias wasn't insane enough to tweet about it, but among the unwritten. Over the next week, 5 more characters infiltrated his life. One trudged beside him across the Brooklyn Bridge during rush hour, chain-smoking pages torn from the manuscript. Another surfaced in the reflection of a puddle, her mouth moving silently until Elias, kneeling on wet asphalt, promised to grant her dialogue. A third materialized in Penn Station, leaned on her cane and scolded him for incorrect Italian conjugations before melting into the crowd. Each arrival followed the same pattern. They appeared, addressed their pain, insisted on completion, then vanished as soon as Elias altered their trajectory. The process exhausted him, but also exhilarated him. For the first time since fame had calcified his process, he wrote like a guerrilla, messy, compassionate, unafraid of sentiment. The real world noticed. His editor, Marla Chen, read the revised chapters and sent an email at 3:12 a.m., all bold. Who are you and what have you done with Grunwald? She attached a dozen heart emojis afterward, which was, for Marla, the equivalent of a standing ovation. Yet Elias sensed an absence, a deep note ringing under the melody. The banker Camellia's father had not appeared, nor had the storm Elias scripted to flood the city in part 4. Something or someone resisted revision. Saturday evening, Elias returned to his own apartment for the first time in days. He paused at the door, bracing for ghosts. Silence greeted him. The sofa lay undisturbed. No child's imprint. No phantom bouquet. Relief seeped in. He poured a drink bourbon 2 fingers and sat at his desk to inspect the outline. He had salvaged many arcs, but the climax remained a Gordian knot. How to punish the villain without shredding the newfound hope of the others? Lightning cracked outside, startling him. The forecast had promised clear skies. He rose to close the window. Rain hammered the glass in horizontal sheets. Canal Street already glimmered with runoff, storm drains vomiting. His mind flashed to Chapter 30, the unnatural cyclone conjured by allegorical forces to wash corruption clean. Another lightning stroke illuminated the apartment, and the tall figure standing by the bookshelf. Rafferty Grunwald, deceased 3 years, gazed at his son. Hair slicked back, pinstriped suit, tie askew, the uniform of the broker he had been until the day insider trading allegations snapped his neck like a trapdoor. Elias staggered. "Dad?" The apparition spoke in the voice Elias remembered from childhood bedtime stories, low and coaxing. "You put me in the book, son. Did you think I'd stay chiseled on the page?" Elias's pulse throbbed. He had indeed modeled the banker on his father, only thinly veiled by name, R.G. Caldwell. He had planned to destroy Caldwell in Tsunami and Flame, a revenge fantasy disguised as moral reckoning. "I didn't mean—" Elias swallowed. "You're not him. You're a character." "That line's eroding, isn't it?" The banker's mouth curved in pity. "You changed their fates, will you change mine?" Rain battered the windows. Somewhere a siren wailed, then drowned in static. Elias thought of Camellia, of Saul and Veronica, of how their gratitude had felt like raindrops evaporating on sun-warmed skin. Could he extend the same mercy to the man whose real counterpart had left his mother penniless? But characters weren't copies. They were composites, instruments of narrative purpose. Caldwell deserved consequences. Without them, the arc collapsed. The banker stepped closer. Water pooled around his polished shoes, mirroring the rising flood outside. "If you condemn me, you condemn yourself. Blood writes blood." "Caldwell is not my father," Elias whispered. "He is what you fear becoming." Lightning flared. The ceiling bulged like the inside of a wave. Plaster liquefied into salt water. Books floated off shelves, paper blossoming like drowned moths. The apartment warped, morphing into the very scene Elias had drafted. Manhattan submerged mid-storm. He stood waist-deep in cold water, laptop sparking on the desk, bourbon glass bobbing away. Caldwell loomed. "Endings, boy. They bite the hand that feeds them." Elias coughed as water swelled to his chest. Panic threatened to yank him under, but another voice bloomed in memory pennies, fierce and impatient. "Screw themes. Rewrite." He slammed eyes shut, summoned the keyboard in his mind, and began to narrate. The storm paled. Water receded like film running backward, spiraling down non-existent drains. Caldwell's suit dried in an instant. Thunder limped into a distant cough. Elias opened his eyes. Apartment restored. Only droplets clung to his cuffs. "What did you do?" Caldwell demanded. "I'm writing," Elias said, breath ragged. "Right now, and you can't stop me." Arrogant child. "Author?" He straightened, surprising himself with the steadiness of his spine. "Listen," he spoke the new scene aloud, words shaping air. Caldwell stands on the stock exchange steps, rain lashing. Camellia appears, no longer frail, brandishing evidence of embezzlement. Saul and Veronica flank her, heroes of an unannounced revolution. Caldwell, seeing his daughter alive and brave, recalls the boy he once was. Terrified of poverty, he surrenders not to police, but to remorse. He kneels, he weeps, and he promises recompense with every dollar he ever stole. As Elias narrated, Caldwell sank to his knees on the hardwood, eyes flooding. Not with seawater, but with human tears. The apartment glowed, not visibly, yet Elias felt warmth radiate like sunrise. Caldwell whispered, "She deserved better." "She does better," Elias replied, "because you choose it." The banker nodded, grief sculpting lines across his cheeks. He reached into his breast pocket, withdrew a photograph of Camellia, the one Elias had described in Chapter 2 but never shown. He placed it on the floor, patted it once, then faded like old film stock bleached by sun. Elias exhaled. No tremor rattled the glass. The storm outside had vanished entirely. Even the streets below gleamed dry. He sat, soaked in sweat, and opened the actual laptop. The cursor waited. He poured the spoken lines onto the screen. They read awkwardly, melodramatic. He let them be. By Monday, Elias completed the Halo Concerto. 20 chapters had changed. 10 were newborn. The ending closed, not with death, but with reclamation. A father rebuilding, a daughter learning to live beside her scars, comrades forging a charity from the rubble. Critics would call it uncharacteristically hopeful. Elias called it finished. He emailed the draft to Marla, copied Penny, shut the laptop, and allowed himself one measured sob that shook the desk and the pictures on the wall. No one visited that night. The sofa remained untouched. Silence, the benevolent kind, hummed. Publication wintered and sprang. Reviewers debated whether Elias had softened. Sales soared anyway. Agony was marketable, but redemption attracted those who feared real pain. Elias fielded interviews with practiced composure, offering standard lines about creative evolution. Publicly, he never mentioned midnight children on sofas or floods that walked. But in private notebooks, he kept meticulous lists of dream encounters, the phrases each character uttered, the temperature of the air when they vanished. Part of him expected more guests whenever he began a new story. After the tour, he retreated to a cottage upstate with Penny's old typewriter. They spent afternoons dissecting theater gossip and evenings playing chess poorly. One crisp dawn, she found him on the porch, blank page rolled into the typewriter, fingers hovering. "Ready to birth another legion?" she teased. He shook his head. "Ready to adapt them." She sat beside him. "Have you thought about happy beginnings instead of salvaged endings?" "Beginnings carry their own storms," he said, then smiled. "But yes." He started to type. The city had forgotten how to cry, so the sky hired a poet. Words flowed, shadows listened, but none materialized. They trusted him now. Or maybe they simply rested. He would hurt them. He would heal them. If they visited again, it would be for coffee, not closure. Elias wrote until the ribbon faded, sunlight climbing the porch rails. He paused, stretched, and looked across the meadow, where fog rolled like unwritten parchment. Somewhere within that white silence, countless voices waited, neither pleading nor accusing, only curious. He whispered to them, "I won't leave you unfinished." "I won't console them. I won't leave you unfinished." The breeze ruffled the page, as if nodding. Then he resumed the story,